They replaced my seat with a trash can. At my own son's wedding, everyone laughed, even my son. But just weeks later, I exposed my daughter's betrayal live on national TV. The whole country saw it. My family crumbled. If you think this is just another ordinary family story, you're wrong. Subscribe now and don't miss the haunting real-life films we bring to you. Under a heavy gray sky, the wind carried a quiet coldness through the trees of the cemetery, like it had been summoned to attend the funeral itself. Leaves scraped gently across the worn stone walkway as mourners stood in hushed reverence. A black umbrella tilted slightly to one side, held by trembling fingers. Beneath it stood Ruth Ellington, 76. Frail, but composed, her lips sealed shut as if one word might splinter her from the inside out. The casket lowered slowly into the earth. Beside her, the funeral director gave a quiet nod. The priest muttered something about eternal peace, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. But Ruth didn't hear any of it. Her eyes never left the polished wood of the casket. She didn't blink. She barely breathed. 50 years of marriage now rested 6 feet under the soil of Austin, Texas. People came and went like polite ghosts. They offered soft condolences, some genuine, some mechanical. Her eldest son, David, wrapped an arm around her shoulder with the stiffness of someone who hadn't hugged his mother in years. His wife stood nearby, checking her watch more than once. Ruth noticed, but she said nothing. It wasn't until a light touch grazed her elbow that Ruth stirred. Stephanie, the youngest, always the delicate one, the peacemaker, the one who still called her mama even as a grown woman. Stephanie's voice was warm but low, almost rehearsed. "You don't have to stay out here so long, Mama. You'll get cold." Ruth turned slowly, her eyes searching Stephanie's face for some kind of anchor. "It's already cold," she whispered. Stephanie tightened her grip around Ruth's elbow, steering her gently toward the family car. "Come on, let's go home." The ride back was quiet. The car hummed softly, the windshield smeared with a fine mist of rain. David drove. Stephanie sat beside Ruth in the back seat, her phone buzzing silently in her lap. She didn't look at it. Halfway through the drive, Stephanie cleared her throat. "Mama, I know this is a lot right now, but there are things we need to take care of, legal stuff." Ruth's eyes didn't move. "What kind of things?" "Just technicalities," Stephanie said quickly. "You and Daddy hadn't updated the will in years. There are new forms, and it's just better if everything's, aligned. For your protection." David glanced at them through the rearview mirror but said nothing. Ruth pressed her fingers to her temples. "Can it wait?" Stephanie gave a soft practice smile. "It'll only take 10 minutes. We already have the appointment. I'll go in with you. It's nothing scary, I promise." Ruth didn't argue. She didn't have the energy to. Her husband had always been the one who dealt with paperwork, with lawyers, with signatures and stamps and folders. She just made the pot roast. When they pulled up to the office building, it didn't look like a law firm. It looked like a modern insurance agency. Glass windows, bright lighting, the scent of lemon cleaner in the air. Stephanie led her up to the 3rd floor. A man in a charcoal suit greeted them. "Mrs. Ellington, so sorry for your loss." Ruth nodded stiffly. "This won't take long. We just need your confirmation on some updates to your estate plan. Standard procedure after a major life event like this. Your daughter has been extremely helpful." Ruth looked at Stephanie, who gave her a reassuring nod. "Where do I sign?" Ruth asked. They placed the papers in front of her. Pages and pages of legal terminology that blurred before her eyes. Somewhere in there was her name. Somewhere in there was a transfer of ownership. Somewhere in there her entire life was changing without her truly knowing it. "Right here," the man said, tapping the bottom of the page. Ruth hesitated. Not because she doubted her daughter, but because the pen in her hand felt heavier than usual, like it knew something she didn't. She signed anyway. "A mother trusts." "Initial here too," he added, "and one more on this page." Stephanie was watching her closely, too closely, eyes narrowed with anticipation disguised as concern. When it was done, the man gathered the papers with surgical efficiency. "That's it. You're all set. Everything is in order." Stephanie reached for her hand. "See easy. Let's get you home, Mama." Back in the car, the silence returned. But this time it was thicker, less like grief, more like a fog that knew its way into the corners of the soul. Ruth didn't speak during the ride home. Her fingers rested in her lap, twiddling the wedding ring on her left hand round and silver dulled from years of dish soap and gardening. When they reached her apartment, she opened the door slowly, stepping into a space that no longer felt like hers. The couch still held the indent where her husband used to nap. His reading glasses remained on the end table next to the old lamp with the hummingbird print. She reached out to touch them but pulled her hand back before contact. The silence inside was louder than the rain outside. Stephanie stepped in behind her. "Do you want me to stay the night?" Ruth shook her head. "No, I need a moment." Stephanie lingered. Her tone became clinical. "Don't forget to call me if you need anything, okay? I'll be by later this week to help sort through Dad's things." Ruth nodded. She barely heard her leave. She walked slowly through the apartment, her fingers trailing the worn edges of bookshelves and chair arms and picture frames. When she reached the bedroom, she sat on the edge of the bed. The spot still smelled faintly of aftershave. She picked up the photo on the nightstand. It was taken 32 years ago. Her husband was holding a fish almost bigger than him. She had her arm around his waist, laughing. They looked like two people who had everything and needed nothing else. Her hand shook slightly as she brought the frame closer. "I did what they asked," she whispered. "I signed the damn papers." Her eyes welled, but the tears didn't fall. She had cried enough. She wasn't sure if she had any more left. But the weight inside her chest, that was just getting started. Outside, thunder rolled faintly. The apartment dimmed as clouds swallowed the last bit of sunlight. Ruth set the picture back down, careful not to let the glass clink. Then slowly, deliberately, she lay back on the bed, shoes still on, and stared at the ceiling. The camera would hold there for a beat too long, just enough to catch the breath she tried to swallow, the quiver in her lip, the emptiness in her eyes. And then the screen would cut to black. 1 month later, the sun was out, but nothing felt warm. Ruth stood in line at the bank, the soft jazz humming overhead clashing with her pulse. She clutched her small leather purse close to her chest, fingers wrapped tight around the worn strap. The line moved slowly, a cue of polite sighs and shifting feet. When it was finally her turn, she approached the teller with a tight smile. "Good morning, ma'am," the young man said. "What can I help you with today?" "I'd like to withdraw $800. Ruth replied, her voice steady but low. He nodded, typing quickly. "Just a moment." She looked around. She'd been coming to this branch for over 20 years. She used to know everyone by name. Now it was all new faces and sterile greetings. The young man's typing slowed. His eyes narrowed at the screen. He murmured. Ruth straightened. "Is something wrong?" He clicked again, frowning now. "I'm sorry, ma'am. It says here your account is currently restricted. I can't access your funds." "Restricted?" Her voice sharpened. "Yes, it looks like there's a hold placed. You may need to speak with your legal representative." "My what?" The teller leaned in, dropping his voice. "There's a flag here that says the account is under external management. I'm not allowed to release anything without authorization." Ruth blinked. "Authorization from who?" "This is my money." "I'm sorry, ma'am, that's all I can say." A line was forming behind her, but Ruth didn't move. The room was suddenly too bright, too loud. Her body stiffened as if she were standing on a patch of ice, and it had just started to crack beneath her feet. She walked out without saying another word. The Texas heat slapped her as soon as the glass doors opened. It didn't feel real. The sidewalk blurred slightly as she stepped back into the world. She reached the bus stop just in time, climbed in, and sat at the window with her purse clutched tight. Her reflection stared back at her, a widow in pressed slacks and orthopedic shoes, her lipstick a little smudged, her eyes searching for something, anything that made sense. Back at her apartment complex, the courtyard was quiet. The kind of hush that only comes during weekday afternoons when all the working people are out, and the only souls left behind are those no longer needed in the rush of the world. Ruth climbed the steps to her second-floor unit. The hallway smelled like bleach and fried onions. Her neighbor, Mrs. Callahan, peered through a cracked door, but quickly shut it when Ruth looked her way. That was odd. Then she saw it. Taped to her door with 4 strips of blue painter's tape, a printed sheet with bold black letters. Property listed for sale. Private showing upon request. Contact Techstar Realty Group. Ruth stared at it frozen. The logo, the phone number, the word listed. No, she whispered. She tore the paper down her fingers, trembling. Her key shook in the lock as she forced it open and stumbled inside. She tossed her purse on the counter and pulled out her cell phone. She called Stephanie. It rang, and rang, and rang. Then voicemail. She tried again, same result. On the third try, she left a message, Stephanie. It's your mother. I just came home and there's a sign on my door saying the apartment's for sale. I went to the bank and they said my account's locked. I need you to call me back right now. I don't understand what's going on. She hung up and dialed David next. Hey, Ma, he answered. Everything okay? David, she exhaled. I think something's wrong. I went to the bank and they wouldn't let me take out my money. Then I came home and David, someone is trying to sell my apartment. There was silence on the other end. Ma, didn't you talk to Stephanie about all that? What? Her voice rose. About what? I thought you signed over the property stuff to her and Jared. That's what she said. That everything was being moved around for, I don't know, tax stuff. No, Ruth said. She told me it was just some legal formality. Well, maybe you're just forgetting something. I know this year's been hard. I'm not forgetting, Ruth snapped. A pause. I'm just saying, you've had a lot on your plate. Grief does things to memory. You sure you didn't sign anything about the apartment? I signed something. But she said it was about the will. Nothing else. David sighed. Maybe you just need to rest, Ma. Rest. She nearly dropped the phone. David, they froze my bank account. I can't touch a single dollar. He hesitated again. If she has power of attorney now, maybe that's normal. I never gave her power of attorney. Well, look, why don't I call her and figure it out, okay? You believe her over me, Ruth said flatly. I didn't say that. You don't have to. She hung up before he could respond. The apartment, once familiar, now felt like it was closing in on her. The floral curtains seemed garish, the ticking of the kitchen clock too loud. She sat down on the edge of the couch and stared at the walls. For a second she thought she saw her husband's old hat hanging on the hook, but it was just a shadow. Her chest ached. Outside, muffled voices rose. She walked to the window and peeked through the blinds. Mrs. Callahan and her sister were in the courtyard whispering. I heard she signed everything over, one of them said. She gave the house to her daughter, didn't she? Must be nice, just let the kids take care of it all. Ruth stepped back. Gossip, always the fastest kind of truth to travel, whether it was accurate or not. She pulled her cardigan tighter around her shoulders and sat down at the kitchen table. A cup of cold coffee still sat there from earlier that morning. She sipped it without tasting. The phone didn't ring. No one knocked. She looked around the apartment, the framed photos, the dusty bookshelf, the clock shaped like a cardinal above the stove. How could it all vanish with one signature? She stood and opened the drawer where she kept her documents. She pulled out every file. She had bills, old insurance, a birth certificate, her husband's military papers. But not a single page from the day at the lawyer's office, not one copy of what she'd signed. Stephanie had taken everything. Her legs felt weak and she sat back down with a thud. The hum of the fridge, the creak of a pipe, every sound felt sharper, like the world was mocking her. She whispered into the silence, "What did I do?" And the silence answered nothing. She spent the rest of the afternoon sitting by the window watching the clouds shift across the sky. She didn't eat. She didn't change out of her shoes. She just sat there, phone in hand, staring at the door as if it might open and bring some explanation. But it didn't. Night fell. The lamplight cast a yellow haze across the floor. Ruth sat cross-legged on the couch, now the apartment cold despite the thermostat. At some point she found her husband's old cardigan and pulled it around her shoulders. It still smelled faintly of tobacco and pine. She stared at the ceiling. This was the kind of betrayal that didn't come with yelling or slamming doors. This was slow, quiet, paper cuts across the soul. She reached for the phone one last time and texted Stephanie. "Why is my house for sale?" No response. She placed the phone on the table and didn't look at it again. The street outside grew quiet. Somewhere a dog barked. A train in the distance let out a single mournful whistle. Ruth closed her eyes. She wasn't scared. Not yet. But something inside her had begun to shift. The kind of shift that happens when a woman realizes the life she thought she owned no longer belongs to her. The kind of shift that builds and waits and eventually decides to push back. The next morning came late for Ruth. She hadn't slept much. The city outside her window moved on without her cars. Buses, footsteps on concrete, while she stayed suspended in a fog of confusion and betrayal. Her world had shrunk to the size of a phone that refused to ring a door that wouldn't open, and a bank account she could no longer touch. She sat by the window with a cup of weak coffee, the bitter kind she used to make only when her husband was sick, and she couldn't leave the house to shop. Her hands were wrapped around the mug, not for the taste, but for the warmth. Then a sound broke the monotony, a soft knock followed by the creak of the outer gate. She glanced down into the courtyard just as the screen door flapped shut behind a tall figure in a gray postal uniform. The red TextPost logo was faded on the back of his shirt. A messenger bag hung loosely over one shoulder. He moved with the casual rhythm of someone who'd made this route 1,000 times. Tyler. He'd been delivering in the area for a couple of years, early 20s maybe, always polite, always smiling. Sometimes he'd pause for a brief chat when Ruth was watering her plants or sweeping the front step. He'd once helped her carry a case of bottled water up the stairs, said she reminded him of his grandma who raised him. Today he looked up and saw her through the second-floor window. He gave a small wave. Ruth forced a smile and waved back. A moment later there was a knock on her door. She opened it to find him holding a small, padded envelope. "Morning, Miss Ellington," he said, his voice light. "Got something for you." She took the envelope absently. "Thank you, Tyler." He hesitated, glancing at her. "You okay?" She looked at him for a second longer than usual. Something about the way he asked it wasn't casual. There wasn't that sing-song cheerfulness some people used with the elderly. He asked like he really wanted to know. "No," she said simply. His expression changed. "Want to talk about it?" She stepped aside, surprising even herself. "You have time. I've got 10 minutes between stops," he shrugged. "Maybe 15 if I walk fast afterward." "Then come in," she said. Tyler followed her into the apartment. He looked around, eyes catching the cluttered kitchen counter, the coffee mug with a lipstick stain, the folded quilt on the back of the couch. The place smelled like cinnamon and lavender, and something else, maybe dust from disuse. Ruth gestured to the small round table in the kitchen. "Sit. I'll make tea." "You don't have to. I need to keep my hands busy," she interrupted gently. He nodded and sat. When she returned with 2 mugs, her eyes were still tired. She placed one in front of him and sat down across the table. Her hands rested in her lap. "I think I've been robbed," she said. Tyler blinked. "You mean like someone broke in?" "No." Her voice didn't waver. "I think someone stole everything I own, on paper." He leaned forward. "What do you mean?" She told him. Not all of it, not yet, but enough. About the bank account, the apartment being listed for sale, the unanswered calls, the silence from her children. She spoke in clean, clipped sentences like reading aloud from an autopsy report. Tyler didn't interrupt. His face grew more serious with every detail. "Jesus," he finally said. "And you signed what exactly?" She reached over and pulled open the side drawer of the table. Inside was a manila folder slightly bent with a few documents. She placed it on the table and opened it. "I don't have the main ones. Stephanie said she'd keep them for safekeeping. These are the copies of some things I got in the mail later." The envelope had no return address. Tyler picked up the first document, his brows furrowing as he read. "It's full of legal language," Ruth added. "I don't know what half of it means." He read in silence. Then he pulled a pen from his pocket and started circling words. "This clause here, this is a durable power of attorney. It gives whoever's name the authority to act on your behalf financially. In this case, that's Stephanie." Ruth felt her throat tighten. "And this?" she asked, pointing to another page. He flipped it over. "Looks like a transfer of deed for the condo, signed and notarized." "But I didn't sign that." "Are you sure?" "I signed something, but it wasn't this. It didn't say any of those words." Tyler looked at her. "Was anyone else in the room when you signed?" "The lawyer and Stephanie. No witnesses, no second party, just them." Ruth nodded slowly. Tyler leaned back in his chair, tapping the paper with his pen. "This stinks," he said. "Then why won't anyone believe me?" He looked up at her, and for the first time Ruth saw something flicker in his eyes, recognition. Not just of the situation, but of the kind of betrayal that doesn't show up with broken windows or bruises. The kind that hides in fine print and empty smiles. "Because it's not the kind of crime people expect," he said. You didn't wake up to find your wallet missing. You woke up and found your life handed to someone else, and they made it look like it was your idea. Ruth swallowed hard. You talk like you've seen this before. I studied law, he said. 2 years in, I ran out of money. Couldn't finish. But I still remember how to read legalese. She raised an eyebrow. You studied law and ended up delivering mail. He smiled a little bitter. Better than making coffee for lawyers who tell you you're too poor to finish school. She looked down at the documents again. So what do I do? Tyler leaned in. You do what lawyers do. You build a case. You prove fraud. You show that you signed something under false pretenses, or that your signature was copied somewhere else. But how? We start with what you do remember. The place, the people, the time. And then we work backward. We check county records, see who filed what. We look for any mismatched documents, and we make sure they know you're not just going to roll over and disappear. She stared at him. That sounds like a lot. It is, he admitted. I'm 76. He smiled. Then it's a good thing you're not doing it alone. They sat there for a moment just sipping tea. The light through the kitchen window was pale, casting long shadows across the floor. Somewhere outside, a car alarm chirped and then silenced. The world, as always, kept turning. But something had shifted. She reached for the pen he'd been using and tapped it against the table. If we do this, we are doing this. Then I want it done right. I want everything, every lie, every paper, every penny dragged into the light. Tyler nodded slowly. We'll drag it out piece by piece. Ruth let out a long breath. Her hands, once trembling, found stillness around the warm ceramic mug. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel like she was falling. And for the first time in years, someone had listened and believed her. Outside, the mail truck beeped faintly in the distance, reminding Tyler that time was ticking. He stood and slid the documents back into the folder. Let me take a photo of these. I'll look into a few things tonight. Ruth handed him the folder without hesitation. As he walked to the door, she followed. Thank you, she said. He paused. You don't have to thank me. Yes, I do. He smiled. You're welcome, Miss Ellington. Call me Ruth. He nodded. Okay, Ruth. The door closed softly behind him. Ruth stood there for a moment, the silence of the apartment no longer quite so suffocating. She walked back to the table and sat down. The tea had gone cold, but her hands no longer trembled. Something had begun, and this time she wasn't alone. Tyler came back 2 days later with his sleeves rolled up and a look in his eyes that Ruth hadn't seen since her husband used to study the horse racing forms on Sunday mornings, focused intense like something was about to break wide open. He dropped his backpack on the kitchen table and pulled out his laptop, a thick legal pad and a small scanner. He didn't even bother with a hello. I think you were right, he said. Ruth stood in the doorway holding 2 mugs of tea. About what? About everything. He motioned to the chair across from him. She set the tea down and sat slowly. I ran the deed transfer through the county records site. It's all legit on paper. Deed moved from your name to a shell corporation called Greystone Holdings LLC, signed, sealed, notarized. I don't even know what an LLC is. It's a limited liability company. It means someone set up a legal entity to hold the asset. In this case, your condo. She blinked, trying to absorb the words. Guess who's listed as the registered agent for Greystone? He didn't wait for her to answer. Jared Flynn. Ruth stared at him, unblinking. Stephanie's husband. Tyler nodded. He turned the screen to show her. It was a page from the Texas Secretary of State's website. A bland listing with Jared's name and address in downtown Austin, and a phone number that when Ruth looked at it made her stomach twist. I've seen that number, she said. It was on the paper taped to my door. Exactly. He's selling your home through a company he controls. No trace of Stephanie. No trace of you. On the outside it looks clean, legal, just business, but it's all built on a lie. He clicked to another tab. And this is your bank account, or what's left of it. How do you have access to that? She asked. I didn't. But I tracked the institution name from the paper you gave me. From there I looked up a few recent court filings linked to Greystone Holdings. And guess what? They recently applied for a bridge loan, using your property as collateral, which means your home is now being leveraged to cover Jared's other debts. Ruth was silent. The mug in her hands was still full. She hadn't taken a sip. I don't understand, she whispered. Why would she do this to me? Tyler didn't answer right away. He leaned back, rubbed his eyes, then looked at her with quiet empathy. People like Jared, they don't start with fraud. They start with desperation, debt, bad decisions. Then they find someone willing to trust them blindly, someone they think won't notice or won't fight back. She shook her head. But Stephanie, she was my baby. When she had her first miscarriage, she didn't want anyone except me at the hospital. I held her like she was 5 again. Her voice cracked. Tyler sat quietly. I thought she loved me. I'm sure she did, he said softly. But love doesn't always win against greed or fear. Ruth looked out the window. A bird landed on the balcony railing, pecked once at a cracked flower pot, then flew off. She wished she could do the same. What do I do? She asked. Tyler opened a small black case from his backpack. Inside was a digital voice recorder the size of a key fob, sleek and matte black. You start listening, he said. You get them talking, and you record everything. Ruth eyed the device. Is that legal? In Texas it is. It's a one-party consent state. As long as you know it's being recorded, it's admissible. Even if it's family. He gave her a grim smile. Especially if it's family. She picked up the recorder. It was lighter than she expected. Somehow, that made it feel more dangerous. You'll need to keep it with you, he said. Turn it on before conversations. Make it look like nothing. Hide it in your coat pocket or your purse. Just let them talk. Eventually, someone's going to slip. Ruth didn't respond. She stared at the recorder as if seeing the path ahead stretch farther than she was ready for. Tyler leaned forward, his voice lower now. I know this isn't easy, but it's how we prove fraud. Paper can be doctored, signatures forged, but voices. You can't fake a confession. She looked at him, eyes clouded but sharp. I'm not scared of what I'll hear, she said. I'm scared it won't matter. It will, he said, if it's loud enough. She nodded, her face firming like setting clay. I've spent weeks screaming into the void, she whispered. If no one's going to hear me, I'll make damn sure they can't ignore me. Tyler's expression didn't change, but something in him shifted. Respect, maybe. Or the quiet realization that he wasn't just helping an old woman anymore. He was helping a woman who was ready to burn down everything that had been used against her. Ruth stood up. She walked to her coat rack and pulled down a beige trench with a faded rose stitched on the sleeve. She slipped the recorder into the inner pocket. I see David every Sunday for brunch, she said. Stephanie usually joins. Perfect, Tyler replied. Go in gentle. Let them think you're still confused, still vulnerable. That's how they get comfortable. She turned to face him. What happens when I get the proof? Then we make it public, he said, as public as it gets. She didn't blink. He smiled. You really ready for this? She paused. No. He opened his mouth to reassure her, but she cut him off. But I wasn't ready to lose my husband either. Or to be told I'm crazy. Or to watch everything I built be sold off like it meant nothing. So maybe ready's not the word. She zipped up the coat. But I'm not staying quiet. Not anymore. Tyler stood too. Then let's start digging. They sat back at the table, a laptop open, documents laid out like puzzle pieces. They mapped out timelines, names, bank transfers, property shifts. Tyler showed her how to search through public records, how to filter deeds by filing date. Hours passed. The afternoon faded into evening. Ruth's kitchen transformed into something like a war room, only instead of maps and weapons there were property records and coffee mugs. At one point, Tyler clicked open a PDF with a scanned copy of a notary signature. See this, he said. Same notary on every document, but I looked her up. She died last year. Ruth's eyes widened. So the notary stamp? Forged, Tyler confirmed. Which means someone in that office faked the signature, the stamp, and filed it anyway. It also means we just found our first crack. She leaned back in her chair, overwhelmed but alert. This is real. He nodded. It's more real than they ever expected it to become. Ruth reached for the recorder again. She ran her fingers over its smooth edges. I want them to say it out loud, she whispered. I want to hear it. Tyler looked at her. You will. He packed up his things as the sky turned dark. The last thing he did was hand her a small notebook. Keep this on you. Write down everything. Every call, every odd comment, every inconsistency. It'll help when we piece it all together. She nodded and slid it into her purse. As he stepped to the door, she stopped him. Tyler. Yeah. Why are you helping me? He hesitated. Because someone should have helped my grandma, and no one did. She didn't ask more. He left and she locked the door behind him. The apartment was still quiet, still dim, but the silence no longer felt like surrender. It felt like preparation. She sat back down at the kitchen table and flipped open the notebook. Page 1, she wrote, "If no one will listen, I'll make them hear." She underlined it. Twice. The clink of forks and quiet laughter filled the long oak dining table. Ruth sat at the far end, her posture upright, her cardigan buttoned all the way up, despite the warmth drifting through the Flynn family's suburban kitchen. It was one of those Sundays Stephanie insisted on keeping, even when most of them came late and left early. A roast sat untouched on Ruth's plate. Around her wine glasses, tilted napkins fluttered in lapse conversations spun from office gossip to vacation plans. She kept her smile, measured, her eyes soft the way older women are expected to be quiet, grateful, harmless. But today she was wired with something else. In her coat pocket, beneath a folded tissue and a single peppermint, the small voice recorder hummed silently to life. "Stephanie," Ruth said, her voice as breezy as she could manage, "you know I was thinking about that paperwork we did after the funeral." Stephanie, seated 2 chairs away, and mid-pour of a Cabernet, looked up with a bright, hollow smile. "Yes, Mama. I've been a bit forgetful lately, you know," Ruth chuckled. "Sometimes I wonder if I even remember what I signed." Stephanie waved a hand in the air, dismissing the thought. "Don't worry about it, really. It was just to get the property out of limbo, all perfectly standard." Ruth kept her tone light. It just seemed like such a big change, moving everything over. "Well," Stephanie interrupted, picking up her glass, "you and Dad never really updated anything after retirement. We were just making things cleaner. If something happened, God forbid, we didn't want you stuck in probate." Ruth murmured, nodding. "Probate. That's the one with the judge, right?" "Yes, and it's a nightmare," Stephanie said with a short laugh. "Ask Jared. He handled most of it. You remember we talked about this." Ruth blinked, playing into the part. "I remember vaguely. You said you didn't want to deal with lawyers, that it gave you migraines." Stephanie reached for the salad bowl, her voice casual. "So we took care of it for you. Nothing's changed, really. You're still, taken care of." Ruth smiled. "That's kind of you, sweetheart." She saw it then, the micro-shift in Stephanie's face. A subtle lean back, a soft tension in her jaw. Guilt, maybe, or suspicion. It was gone just as fast. "Of course," Stephanie replied. Across the table, David was talking about his job, something about a new contract. No one paid attention to the quiet unraveling at the far end. "I just hope I didn't sign something too important," without realizing, Ruth continued as if thinking aloud. Stephanie's gaze narrowed. "What are you saying?" Nothing, Ruth waved. "Just an old woman worrying too much." Stephanie's laugh came a beat late. "Mama, you worry because you don't have to anymore. That's what we're here for." Ruth reached for her water. Her hand didn't shake, but inside her coat the tiny device kept spinning. Later that evening, back at the apartment, she handed Tyler the recorder. He played it 3 times. Each time his brows drew lower, his lips more pursed. He sat back in the kitchen chair, rubbing his forehead. "It's something, but it's not enough." She practically admitted it, Ruth argued. "No," she skirted around it. "She used language that sounds like help, not theft." He paused. "We'd need a legal team to pick it apart in court. And even then, it's your word against her intention." She said Jared handled most of it. "That's the closest thing to a lead." Tyler nodded. "But unless we get them actually saying what they did, like we tricked her. She didn't know what she signed. A DA won't touch it. They'll call it a misunderstanding, family drama, gray area." Ruth clenched her jaw. "You mean I need her to confess?" Out loud. "Yes. And she won't do that, not when she knows I'm suspicious." "She doesn't," Tyler said. "Not yet." Ruth narrowed her eyes. "Then we make her feel safe." A long pause stretched between them. Tyler leaned forward, voice low. "There's another chance. I heard Stephanie telling someone at the post office about planning a birthday party for her son. She's inviting the whole family. Big, loud wine flowing. People let their guard down at those things." Ruth stared at him. "And you think I can catch her then, if we plan it right?" "What do you want me to do, corner her near the balloons and scream 'confess' into a cupcake?" Tyler grinned, a flash of youth breaking through his fatigue. "Not exactly." He pulled out a newer model of the recorder, this one embedded into a fake brooch. "This goes on your lapel. Audio quality's sharper, battery lasts longer." Ruth picked it up. It looked like costume jewelry. "What if she gets suspicious?" "She won't. Not if you play the part you played today. Confused, fragile, kind. That makes people bold. Ruth frowned. I don't like pretending to be stupid. You're not. You're strategic. She held the brooch in her hand, feeling its weight. And what happens if I get it? We take it public, he said. Media, local news. Hell, we'll make a podcast if we have to. She smirked. You really think the world wants to hear about a 76-year-old woman getting screwed over by her own daughter? Tyler met her eyes. I do. Because they're not just hearing about you, they're hearing about their own mothers, their aunts, themselves. This happens more than you know. Ruth said nothing. She clipped the brooch to her cardigan. Fine, she said. Let's make her talk. 3 days later, the plan began. Stephanie called Ruth to personally invite her to her grandson's 7th birthday party. It'll be nice to have you there, Mama. We'll have cake and games and Jared's grilling. I'd love to come, Ruth said sweetly. Will there be music? Stephanie laughed. You're not dancing, are you? I might surprise you. Ruth marked the date on the fridge calendar. The pen dug deep into the paper. That night, Tyler sat across from her with a notepad. Here's what you need to do. Don't push. Let her lead. Ask soft questions. Things like, do you ever regret it? Or, did we really have to move everything over so fast? Let her fill in the blanks. People confess when they feel like no one's looking, and the others, don't worry about them. Parties are chaotic. Noise works in our favor. Just stay close. Keep her talking. Laugh when she does. Nod. Make her forget you're listening. Ruth nodded. What if she doesn't take the bait? She will, Tyler said. People like her can't help but admire their own work. You just have to give her the stage. Ruth exhaled slowly. Then I'll give her the whole damn spotlight. She didn't sleep much the night before the party. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan as it turned in lazy circles. She thought about birthdays from years past when Stephanie was still in pigtails, running barefoot through the kitchen, demanding a red cake with pink icing, or trying to make her brother eat glitter. There were photos, old VHS tapes somewhere in the closet. It all felt like someone else's story now. That girl was gone, and the woman who replaced her had taken more than just memories. The morning of the party, Ruth dressed carefully. Cream blouse, slacks with a bit of stretch, a cardigan with subtle floral stitching and the brooch polished and pinned just over her heart. She looked in the mirror and practiced her smile, soft, maternal, unassuming. Then she practiced something else, quiet resolve, the kind that builds beneath decades of silence, the kind that only comes from being underestimated one too many times. By the time Tyler picked her up, she was ready. Let's make some noise, she said, climbing into the car. He glanced at her, the corner of his mouth twitching. Hell yes, we will. It was a clear Saturday afternoon, the kind Texas offered up like an apology, after a week of moody skies, sunny, dry, just enough breeze to move the wind chimes. The Flynn backyard was alive with chatter and music. Red and blue streamers curled around the porch railing, and balloons bounced against each other lazily. Laughter echoed from the bounce house set up near the hedges, and the grill hissed as Jared flipped burgers like he had something to prove. Inside the house, Ruth stood in front of a mirror adjusting her necklace, a simple gold chain with a modest charm. Looks nice, Tyler said behind her. She met his eyes in the reflection. It better. It's also a microphone. He gave her a single nod. The signal's strong. Range is limited, though, so I'll stay close. I'll be in the car parked 2 houses down. Audio will transmit live to my phone, and I'll be recording everything. Ruth exhaled slowly. Her fingers brushed over the charm once more before letting it fall against her blouse. She'll be drinking today. All the better. Tyler pulled a phone from his pocket and handed it to her. Emergency call. 2 buttons pre-dialed to me, just in case anything goes sideways. Ruth didn't ask what sideways looked like. She didn't need to. By 3:00 p.m. she was inside the party. The Flynn kitchen was crowded with family neighbors, a few co-workers Ruth didn't recognize. Children zoomed past with juice boxes and superhero capes. Someone was laughing too loud in the living room. Stephanie found her near the dessert table. Mama, you made it. Ruth smiled warm and soft. Wouldn't miss it. 7's a big year. Stephanie leaned in to kiss her cheek. Her breath already hinted at the red wine in her glass. Let me get you a plate, she said, weaving through the crowd before Ruth could reply. Ruth's eyes scanned the room with casual precision. She moved slowly, mingling with 2 neighbors she hadn't seen since the funeral. They talked about the weather, about school starting again, about how Ruth looked well. No one mentioned the condo. No one mentioned the bank account. Stephanie returned with a plate piled high, chicken sliders, deviled eggs, chips. She handed it over and refilled her own glass before Ruth could say thank you. "You doing okay?" Stephanie asked, tilting her head. Ruth took a bite of something salty and nodded. "I've been thinking about the paperwork again." Stephanie tensed just slightly. "Mama, I'm not upset," Ruth said quickly. "I know you were just trying to help, but I can't stop wondering, what if I'd said no?" Stephanie blinked. "Said no to signing," Ruth said softly, "to moving everything over." Stephanie took a long sip of her wine, then chuckled. "Mama, you're overthinking. Am I?" Ruth tilted her head. "I mean, what if I'd changed my mind halfway through?" Stephanie shook her head with a kind of performative pity. "You didn't. You signed everything. But what if I hadn't?" "Mama, no, really." Ruth pressed gently. "Would that have messed everything up for you and Jared?" Stephanie's voice dropped slightly. "We would have handled it. That's why Jared took care of most of it. He's very resourceful. I remember you saying that at dinner the other day." Stephanie laughed, waving her glass. "Oh, that man could write his own signature guidebook. I mean, seriously, he could duplicate mine in high school to skip math tests. I told him you'd make a great forger." Ruth forced a smile, her fingers briefly brushing the charm at her chest. "You know," Stephanie continued, leaning in conspiratorially, "half the paperwork was just red tape. No one even reads those forms. And you were grieving." "I still am." Stephanie blinked. "Of course, I didn't mean it like that. Just, you weren't in a place to deal with decisions. We stepped in. That's what family does." "And what if I'd said no?" Stephanie looked directly at her. "Honestly, it wouldn't have mattered. Jared had it covered." Her words hung in the air, wrapped in the haze of cheap wine and overconfidence. Ruth nodded slowly. "I see." Stephanie smiled as if she'd won something. Then she turned to greet another guest. Inside a car parked down the street, Tyler's phone vibrated softly against the dashboard. He had his earbuds in his eyes, locked on the screen that displayed the audio feed in real time. Every word was clean, crisp. When Stephanie said it wouldn't have mattered, he sat up straighter. And when she said Jared had it covered, he hit a button that bookmarked the moment with a sharp red flag. His pulse quickened. Not quite a confession, but damn close. Back in the backyard, Ruth sat alone at a small metal table, swirling lemonade with a straw. The kids were opening presents. Someone had turned up the music. She watched Stephanie from across the patio, laughing carefree, another glass in her hand. Her voice rising, slipping, floating. The trap hadn't fully closed, but it had snapped hard enough to draw blood. And Ruth wasn't done. At dusk, she slipped away. No goodbyes. No waves. Just a quiet walk down the driveway and a slow turn down the sidewalk. Her shoes made soft clicks on the concrete. Her hand clutched her purse close. 2 blocks down, she opened the passenger door of Tyler's car and got in. Neither spoke for a moment. Then she unclipped the necklace and placed it gently in his hand. Tyler looked at it like it was gold. "Tell me we got it," she said. He nodded. Not a full confession, but enough to show intent. And a hell of a setup. Ruth didn't smile. "I want it off my chest. Out of me. I want the world to know what she did." Tyler plugged the recorder into his laptop. "We'll transcribe it. Isolate the parts that matter. Then we make our move." She looked out the windshield. Across the street, a family was lighting sparklers in their front yard. Kids screamed with delight. "I raised her better," Ruth murmured. "I believe you. She wasn't always like this." "No one ever is," he said. "Until they are." Ruth turned back to him. "Next step," he hesitated. "Police. But I don't trust them to move fast enough. Not unless we put pressure on. That means going public." She exhaled slowly. I've got a friend at the local news station, small time. But she's looking for something that hits hard. Local. Human. Scandalous." Ruth's face tightened. "You want to make me a headline?" "No," Tyler said quietly. "I want to make her one." Ruth's lips pressed into a thin line. Then she nodded. "Make sure it hurts." They drove back to her apartment in silence. The night air was heavy with the scent of barbecue and burnt candles. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked once, twice, then stopped. When Ruth stepped inside her living room, she turned to Tyler before closing the door. "She thinks I'm weak," she said. "Let her." "Why?" "Because people who think you're weak never see it coming when you hit back." She nodded once, then shut the door softly. Tyler stood on the porch a moment longer. He pulled out his phone, opened the voice app, and hit play. Stephanie's voice echoed out in the dark. Honestly, it wouldn't have mattered. Jared had it covered. His lips curled. Let the fire begin. The police station was airless and fluorescent, with that particular sterile scent of old coffee and newer indifference. Tyler sat across from a desk sergeant who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Ruth sat beside him, back straight eyes, calm but sharp. Tyler laid the flash drive on the desk between them. The recording is time-stamped. The voice is Stephanie Flynn. That's Ruth's daughter. She admits her husband orchestrated the asset transfer without Ruth's consent. The officer glanced at the drive like it might bite. "We understand you have to vet it," Tyler continued. "But we're asking for immediate attention. This is financial elder abuse. She's lost her house, her savings." "Sir," the sergeant said, lifting a hand, "I get it. But investigations don't move overnight. This has to go through intake, then we assign it to a case officer. Probably won't be until next week." Ruth spoke up, voice, "Even I don't have until next week." The sergeant didn't flinch. "Ma'am, I understand this is stressful, but—" "No," Ruth said, "you understand paperwork, not stress, not betrayal, not what it feels like to realize your own daughter made you homeless while you were still tucking away her childhood drawings in a drawer." There was a pause. The sergeant cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. "I'll file the report," he said. "But until the legal team confirms this, your best option is to retain a private attorney." Tyler stood, scooping up the drive. "Thanks for nothing." Outside in the parking lot, he threw his hands up. "A week. They're going to sit on this for a week while her condo gets sold and her accounts stay frozen." "They don't care," Ruth said, arms folded against the wind. Tyler paced. "We need pressure. We need eyes. We need something bigger than this dusty-ass building." He paused. His phone was already in his hand. "I know someone," he muttered. "She owes me." Ruth arched a brow. Tyler smiled grimly. "You're about to meet the only person in this town louder than both of us." Her name was Nadia Cruz, mid-30s, glasses perched perpetually on her head, and a voice that could slice through newsroom chaos like a blade. She met them at a downtown diner over lukewarm coffee and too much eye contact. "You sure you want to do this on air?" she asked, eyes flicking between them. "Will people watch?" Ruth asked. Nadia laughed once. "Lady, if you're half as sharp on camera as you are in person, they won't blink. But this kind of thing, family dirt money drama, doesn't just air, it explodes. You ready for that?" "I don't want revenge," Ruth said. "Bullshit," Nadia replied. "Everyone wants revenge. But I'll take your word for it. Just know once this hits, there's no walking it back." Tyler reached into his bag and slid the recorder across the table. "You'll want to hear this first." The newsroom smelled like burnt coffee and adrenaline. Nadia sat in a soundproof booth with her headphones on, jaw tightening as she listened. When she heard Stephanie's voice, honestly, it wouldn't have mattered. Jared had it covered. She froze. Then she leaned forward and hit replay. She sat like that for nearly an hour, pulling clips, splicing context, building a timeline with Tyler's help. Ruth sat nearby, quiet hands folded in her lap, watching it all unfold like she was waiting in the lobby of a courtroom that didn't yet exist. Finally, Nadia pulled off the headphones. "I've got a slot. This Friday. We're taping an episode on family legacy, how wills divide or bind bloodlines. We've been prepping it for weeks. Guess who we already booked as a guest?" Tyler blinked. "No way." Nadia smirked. "Stephanie Flynn. She's set to appear with her husband. Some fluff segment about navigating grief and protecting assets." Tyler leaned back. "You're kidding." "Nope." Ruth smiled, but there was no joy in it. Nadia leaned in. "We want you on the panel." Ruth tilted her head. "Do they know I'm coming?" "They'll know when the lights go on." Friday arrived with a gray sky and rising tension. Inside the station studio, cameras were prepped, lighting adjusted. A producer handed Ruth a cup of tea and a mic pack, while Tyler stood just outside the wings, eyes locked on every movement. The stage was set like a living room, plush chairs, a coffee table, fake plants. The kind of set design that says we're just having a friendly chat while secretly sharpening the knives. Stephanie was already seated, polished to perfection in a lilac blouse and soft curls. Jared sat beside her, every inch the supportive husband. They smiled for the pre-show promo, their body language perfectly rehearsed. They didn't notice Ruth until she was escorted in from stage left. Stephanie's smile wavered. Mama. Ruth didn't respond. She took her seat at the opposite end of the couch. Jared's smile dropped entirely. What is she doing here? The host, a woman named Tracy, stepped in with a warm grin. We thought it'd be meaningful to hear from multiple generations today, get the full picture. Stephanie tried to recover, nodding stiffly. Of course, that makes sense. But her eyes didn't leave Ruth. The cameras rolled. The first 10 minutes were pleasantries. Talk of legacies, of planning ahead. Jared pontificated on estate structures. Stephanie spoke about grief as a clarifier of priorities. Ruth said little. She sipped her tea and waited. Then Tracy asked Ruth, "How did you feel about the transition of your assets to your daughter's management?" Silence. The camera panned. Ruth set down her cup. "I didn't know it was a transition," she said calmly. "I thought it was a signature, one that wouldn't change my entire life." Stephanie shifted. "Mama." "No," Ruth said, voice still quiet. "Let's tell the truth. I signed papers I didn't understand because I trusted you, and you used that trust to take everything I had." The set went cold. Jared leaned forward. "That's not fair. We've supported you." "Have you?" Ruth's eyes narrowed. "Or have you used me to refinance your debts and flip my home for profit?" Tracy blinked, caught between scandal and gold. Nadia, watching from the control booth, gave a subtle nod. "Would you like to respond?" Tracy asked Stephanie. Stephanie's voice wavered. "My mother's been confused lately. She's grieving. And Tyler, this young man, filling her head with conspiracy theories." Ruth raised her hand calmly. "I brought something," she said. She reached into her bag and held up the recorder. Stephanie froze. Ruth pressed play. The audio filled the set, Stephanie's voice, unedited, unmistakable. Honestly, it wouldn't have mattered. Jared had it covered. The words played twice. Once was shocking. Twice was undeniable. Jared stood abruptly. "Turn that off." Ruth didn't. The crew didn't. The control room didn't. Stephanie paled. Tracy looked stunned. "We were not made aware of this audio before the segment." Tyler, behind the camera, smiled. Nadia whispered into her headset, "Keep rolling." Ruth faced the lens, her voice clear, unwavering. "I'm not here to destroy my daughter. I'm here to reclaim the truth. Because the law has rules, but so do families. And both were broken here." Stephanie stood now, shaking. "This is insane." But no one stopped the tape. No one reached to cut the feed. They let it burn. The show wrapped in chaos. Jared stormed off set. Stephanie refused to speak further. Tracy stammered an outro. Ruth stayed seated, eyes steady. The cameras cut. But by then the moment had already happened. The truth had aired, and the fire was spreading. Backstage, Nadia hugged Ruth tightly. "You just rewrote the segment in the local news cycle." Ruth smiled, soft but satisfied. "Good." Tyler stood at her side, holding the recorder like a trophy. "You ready for what comes next?" he asked. Ruth glanced at the chaos unfolding behind her. "I was born ready," she said. The clip hit the internet like a lightning strike across dry timber. Within hours of the broadcast, it had been trimmed, subtitled, reposted, and stitched into countless reels. Stephanie Flynn's voice, once calm and calculated, now echoed across every screen with damning clarity. It wouldn't have mattered. Jared had it covered. It made its way to Reddit, TikTok, even national morning shows. The caption changed depending on the outlet. "Daughter scams elderly mother family fraud in Austin exposed mama. You signed it." The voice that broke a dynasty. By Tuesday, Ruth's face had become a symbol, part fury, part grace. A grandmother wronged, a matriarch robbed. The woman who fought back not with fists but with a recorder. And the people noticed. The public turned on Stephanie with surgical cruelty. Her social media accounts were flooded. Sponsors from her husband's floundering real estate firm dropped within 48 hours. Protesters showed up outside the condo. "Ruth lives here," written in chalk on the pavement. Some even brought flowers. One woman brought soup. And then the police called back. Tyler was the first to hear. The phone rang while he and Ruth were at her apartment going over the final set of documents he'd collected for her probate advocate. He answered, listened, nodded, then handed the phone to Ruth. "They want to speak to you." Ruth took it calmly. "Yes." The officer on the other end was polite but firm. "Ms. Ellington, this is Detective Klein with APD's Financial Crimes Unit. We've received several complaints, reviewed the broadcast, and we're formally opening an investigation into your daughter and her husband for suspected financial fraud, elder abuse, and unlawful misrepresentation." Ruth's hand tightened around the phone, but her voice was even. "About time. We'll need a formal statement in person. I'll be there first thing in the morning." She handed the phone back to Tyler and looked out the window for a long moment. "You hear that?" she said softly. "Hear what?" The sound of the house creaking back into its foundation. David showed up the next morning, not with his wife, not in a suit, not with excuses. He stood at her door, cap in hand, eyes puffy and red-rimmed. Ruth didn't speak at first. She just stared at her son, the boy who used to climb apple trees and bring her half-squished flowers, the man who had called her forgetful. He stepped inside without asking. He stood in the center of the living room like a man without a compass. "I didn't know," he said. "I swear to God, Ma, I didn't know." Ruth sat in her chair, folded her hands, and waited. David's voice cracked. "I thought you were confused. I thought maybe you just didn't remember. Stephanie, she said she was handling things, that you wanted her to, and you believed her." "I did," he whispered, "because it was easier." There it was, the real confession, not of theft but of abandonment. "I wasn't trying to hurt you," he said, falling to his knees beside her. "I just didn't want to be the son who thought his mom had lost it." Ruth reached out, touched the side of his face. "You didn't have to believe everything. Just me." He started to cry. For a long time she said nothing. She just let his head rest against her lap like he was a child again. That afternoon, Stephanie was served. 2 plainclothes officers arrived at the Flynn residence with a subpoena and a search warrant. The media had been camped nearby since sunrise. Cameras rolled as Stephanie opened the door and was informed she was being summoned for questioning. Jared appeared moments later in gym shorts and a t-shirt. He asked if the officers had a warrant. They handed him a copy. Stephanie tried to remain calm, but her voice trembled. "You're making a mistake. This is all a misunderstanding." One officer replied, "You can explain that downtown." She was not handcuffed, not arrested. But the message was clear. Her face, once polished and smiling under studio lights, was now frozen in the frame of every news channel's breaking banner: Stephanie Flynn, under investigation for alleged fraud against her mother. Tyler watched it from his phone in Ruth's living room. "Damn," he muttered. "That's what poetic justice looks like." Ruth, folding laundry, didn't look up. "It's not justice yet." The court moved faster than expected thanks to public pressure and media heat. Within 2 weeks, a probate hearing was scheduled to review the legitimacy of the property and financial transfers made from Ruth's accounts. Ruth stood in the courtroom, flanked by her volunteer legal advocate and Tyler, who refused to let her go in alone. Stephanie arrived in a gray pantsuit that looked like it had been picked out by a crisis PR team. Jared wasn't with her. His own legal troubles had now expanded money laundering, improper use of corporate funds, even accusations of forging notary seals. He was being investigated at the federal level. The hearing wasn't criminal, it was procedural. But the room was heavy with tension. The judge, an older woman with a no-nonsense face, flipped through the documents like she was peeling back the skin of a rotten fruit. The court finds, she finally said, that the transfers made to Greystone Holdings and affiliated accounts were obtained under false pretenses and without informed consent from Ms. Ruth Ellington. Stephanie closed her eyes. The judge continued. "Therefore, this court invalidates the power of attorney filed on March 17th, voids all asset transfers, and freezes any profits made as a result of said transactions, pending further civil and potential criminal proceedings." Tyler whispered under his breath. Boom. Then came the last line. "Stephanie Flynn is hereby removed from any position of inheritance or financial authority over Ms. Ellington's estate. All contested assets are to be returned to the state for reassignment through proper legal channels." A low gasp moved through the courtroom. Stephanie sat frozen. Her lips moved, but no words came out. Ruth stood still, her spine like iron. When the judge exited, Ruth turned to her daughter, their eyes locking across the emptying courtroom. "I gave you everything," Ruth said, "and you gave it to the fire." Stephanie didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. Outside, the press swarmed. Tyler shielded Ruth as microphones and cameras surged forward. "Ms. Ellington, is it true you're reclaiming your property? Will you press criminal charges? How does it feel to be vindicated?" Ruth paused just long enough. She looked into one camera. Her voice was measured cool as stone. I didn't fight to punish her. I fought to remind her I was still here. Then she walked through the crowd like it wasn't even there. That evening, Tyler brought takeout Thai food extra spring rolls. They ate on Ruth's porch under the soft glow of a string of patio lights he'd hung earlier that week. She sat cross-legged in a wicker chair, chopsticks in hand, looking both older and lighter than he'd ever seen her. "I think I'm done fighting," she said between bites. Tyler nodded. "You fought more than enough." She smiled. "Now I want to build." "Build what?" She didn't answer right away. She looked up at the sky, clear-wide and quiet. Something that can't be stolen. The courthouse was nearly empty when Ruth sat down across from the probate officer one final time. A slim stack of papers lay between them, white and clean, waiting to be signed. Everything she had fought for, every document reversed, every penny traced, had now made its way back to her. The condo, the savings, the accounts, all of it. Hers again. The woman across the desk handed her a pen. "You can begin the reinstatement process here. We'll file the full property restoration before the end of the day." Ruth looked down at the signature line, her name printed in full Ruth Margaret Ellington. She held the pen but didn't move. The officer gave a polite smile. "Take your time." "I've had time," Ruth said softly. "And I've had more clarity in the last month than I had in 10 years. The officer tilted her head, waiting. "I'm not signing that," Ruth said. The smile faded slightly. "I'm sorry. I don't want it," Ruth said. "The condo, the stocks, the money, I don't need it." The officer looked confused. "But ma'am, it's yours, legally restored. We've validated every transfer as illegitimate." Ruth nodded. "Yes, but they were mine before the ink, before all the tricks and titles and lawyers. And I've come to understand that what I actually lost wasn't made of brick or paper." She set the pen down. "I don't need a big house," she said, standing slowly. "I need peace, and people who see me, not just my value." Then she reached into her coat and pulled out a second envelope already signed. "This," she said, sliding it forward, "is a full donation of all recovered assets minus a modest monthly pension to the Austin Children's Community Fund. They'll use it better than I ever could." The officer opened the envelope and blinked. "I've made arrangements for legal oversight. No middlemen. Every dollar goes to kids who have less than I did," which now I realize was still a lot. The woman didn't speak for a long moment. Finally, she said, "Would you like to make this public, a press release, a donation event?" Ruth smiled. "No," she said. "I already made enough noise for a lifetime. Let this one be quiet." That same week, she and Tyler drove past the edge of East Austin in his old Nissan. They pulled up to a vacant brick building on the corner of a half-forgotten block. The windows were smudged with dust, the sign above the awning barely legible, "Lenny's Grill. Closed since 2019. Tyler shifted into park. "Still want this one?" Ruth stared at the building. The front door hung crooked. The roof needed patching, but it stood firm like it had weathered storms and somehow refused to fall apart. She liked that. "Yes," she said, "this one." The next few weeks were a haze of sweat paint and borrowed tools. They scrubbed floors. They peeled off cracked wallpaper and patched holes in the drywall. Tyler rewired old lighting. Ruth polished glass panels until her wrists ached. A retired plumber from the neighborhood offered to fix the bathroom for free after hearing the story. They painted the walls warm yellow, hung up photos of local kids, set out mismatched chairs Ruth found at a community sale. She picked each one for comfort, not style. "It doesn't have to be pretty," she told Tyler. "It has to feel like welcome." One night they stood together in front of the front window, staring at the empty sign box above the door. Tyler said, "We could call it anything. Mama Ruth's Second Chance Cafe." Ruth just smiled. "No, I've got it." The next morning, a local artist hand-painted it in bright, steady strokes. "Ruth's Truths." And just beneath that, in smaller letters, "A warm meal and a free piece of advice every morning." They opened quietly. No ads, no flyers. The only notice was a chalkboard sign outside the front door that read, "Open if you're hungry, come in." At first, only a handful of people came. An elderly woman pushing a grocery cart. A man with grease-stained hands from the auto shop next door. A teenager too shy to make eye contact. Ruth greeted each one with a cup of coffee and the same question. Hot plate or cold heart today? They always laughed and always chose the plate. The food wasn't gourmet. It was oatmeal with cinnamon eggs with toast soup that changed depending on what vegetables she found cheap the day before. But every dish came with a note on the napkin handwritten by Ruth that morning. "You're not broken, just bruised. Sometimes what you lost wasn't meant to stay. Even a flat tire gets patched." People came for the food. They stayed for the words. Tyler handled the back end. Inventory, repairs, quiet coaching when Ruth's knees ached from standing too long. Sometimes he'd sit at the counter and listen as Ruth told stories to strangers about her childhood in Amarillo, about a dog she once rescued, about how grief doesn't take appointments. "You ever think about writing a book?" he asked one day. "I'm writing one every morning," she said, "in pancakes and paper towels." The media circled back eventually. Nadia called twice. "We want a follow-up," she said. "The world wants to know what happened to the woman who took her daughter down on live TV." Ruth declined. "I'm done being a headline." "Then let's make it a love letter," Nadia countered. "A piece on what healing looks like." Ruth paused. Then she said, "Come by for breakfast." The piece aired 2 weeks later. No scandal this time. Just footage of Ruth flipping eggs, pouring coffee, handing out napkins with tiny messages. A slow pan of the chalkboard menu. Tyler in the background laughing as he replaced a light bulb. Customers sitting in sunlight holding food and paper notes like they mattered equally. The story closed with Ruth saying, "I thought getting everything back would fix me. But what I needed was never the house, the bank, or the title. I needed a table, and people, and the chance to give something honest." It wasn't viral. It was better. It stayed. One morning, just after sunrise, Ruth unlocked the front door and turned the sign to open. A little girl stood outside in mismatched pajamas holding a backpack too big for her. "You lost, sweetheart?" Ruth asked gently. The girl shook her head. "Mama says she'll come get me when she finds a place, but I'm hungry now." Ruth knelt down, knees popping. "You like pancakes?" The girl nodded. Ruth smiled. "Then you're home for breakfast." She held the door open wide. The official grand opening of Ruth's Truths began before the sun cleared the rooftops. By 6:45 a.m. there were already 12 people outside, some leaning against the brick wall, others sitting cross-legged on the sidewalk, bundled in coats too thin for the early chill. A woman in scrubs glanced at her watch. A man with a sleeping bag slung over his shoulder clutched a dog-eared copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. 2 teens sat side by side in silence, their hands not quite touching. And then, as if it had always been part of the ritual, Ruth unlocked the front door and flipped the sign. "Open. If you're hungry, come in." Inside, the scent of cinnamon and butter rolled out like a welcome mat. Ruth stood behind the counter in her soft blue cardigan and apron, with the hand-stitched lettering, "One cup at a time." Tyler was already in the kitchen, clanging pans and muttering to himself like an orchestra warming up. The first woman through the door smiled. "You really meant it, huh?" Ruth nodded, every word. As she passed over a steaming plate of eggs and toast, Ruth added the morning's handwritten note, slipped between 2 paper napkins. "You matter, especially today." That note made its way into the woman's coat pocket and didn't leave all week. The line grew quickly. Word had spread from the soft launch weeks earlier, but the grand opening was different. This wasn't just about food anymore. It had become a quiet act of rebellion against loneliness, hunger, and neglect. And Ruth was at the center of it, not as a victim, not as a martyr, but as a constant. A living, breathing reminder that broken things could be repurposed, and people too. By 8:15 a.m., she'd already hugged 3 strangers, handed out 23 meals, and written 12 more notes, each unique. A boy no older than 10 stood quietly near the wall, his backpack slipping off one shoulder. He wasn't in line. He wasn't asking for anything. Ruth caught his eye and walked over. "You look like someone who likes chocolate chip pancakes," she said. The boy shrugged. She crouched down gently. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Leo." "Hi, Leo. I'm Ruth. You waiting for someone?" He hesitated. "Mom dropped me off. Said she had to clear her head. Said I could come here if I got cold." Ruth's smile didn't break, but her chest tightened. "She'll come back," Leo said, eyes cast down. "Eventually." Ruth placed a hand on his back and guided him toward a seat by the window. "Until then," she said, "you've got me." She brought him a plate twice the size of his head. No charge, no questions, just warmth. He devoured the pancakes slowly. When he finished, she handed him a note. "None of this was your fault." Leo read it twice. Then he folded it carefully, tucked it into his backpack, and asked if he could sweep the front porch for tips. By mid-morning, the line had reached the edge of the block. Local media arrived again, this time uninvited. A young reporter from Channel 7 stepped forward with a cameraman and a mic labeled "Good Morning, Austin." "Miss Ellington," she asked, breathless. "We're doing a segment on grassroots food programs, and we were wondering if we could get a word." Ruth wiped her hands on her apron and tilted her head. "Just one." The reporter smiled, "or 2 or 12. Tyler stepped forward from the back, arms crossed. "Keep it clean," he said with a smirk. The reporter's voice switched to anchor mode. "Today we're at the heart of East Austin, where Ruth Ellington, once the center of a widely publicized family fraud case, has turned her story into something extraordinary." Ruth shook her head gently. "Don't start with the fraud." The reporter blinked. "Sorry." Ruth gestured to the people behind her, now seated in booths, laughing over chipped mugs and syrup stains. "Start with them," she said. "They're the story." The camera turned to the faces, some tired, some radiant, all full. The voiceover continued. "What began as one woman's battle for justice has become a daily sanctuary for dozens. Ruth's Truths now serves hot meals every morning to anyone who walks through its doors, no questions asked." That night the segment aired. The headline read, "She was betrayed. Now she feeds a city." Meanwhile, Stephanie disappeared from public view. After the court's ruling and the backlash from the broadcast, she vanished from social media. The house was sold, her phone disconnected. Rumors swirled Florida, maybe Arizona, possibly Costa Rica. But no confirmation ever came. Only one thing was certain: she wasn't in Austin anymore. And Jared, he didn't vanish. He was indicted. The federal investigation tied him to a network of shell companies used for real estate laundering and tax evasion. More than $800,000 had passed through fake accounts connected to elderly clients he and Stephanie had helped restructure. He was arrested leaving a gym in Houston, holding a smoothie and smiling. He didn't smile in court, and Ruth never once mentioned his name again. Weeks later, on a soft Thursday morning, Ruth stood behind the counter refilling sugar jars when she heard the front door chime. She looked up and froze. David stood there holding the hand of a small boy, his grandson. Her grandson. It had been months since she'd seen them. David looked older. Not tired exactly, just humbled. Like life had carved something deeper into him. "Hey, Ma," he said. Ruth wiped her hands. "You came. I told Tommy this was the best place in town for advice. He wanted to find out for himself." The boy grinned, missing one front tooth. Ruth stepped around the counter. Well, he came to the right woman. They sat at a corner booth. Tyler brought out hot cocoa with extra whipped cream. David reached for a napkin and smiled. "You still writing them?" Ruth pulled a pen from her apron. "Every morning." She scribbled something quickly and handed it to Tommy. He read it aloud. "Strong doesn't mean loud. It means still standing." Tommy looked at his dad. "That's a good one." David looked at his mother. "Yeah, it really is." For the first time in years, they sat together without tension, without expectation, just 3 people sharing warmth. Ruth refilled their cocoa and sat with them until the morning rush softened into afternoon hum. Later, when David stood to leave, he hugged her tightly. "I should have believed you sooner," he said. She whispered, "You did, just not out loud." That evening, Ruth walked outside as the last guests trickled out. The sky was lit with pale orange streaks. Tyler locked up behind her, humming a tune she didn't recognize. They stood together on the sidewalk, watching a woman pull a stroller down the block, humming to her baby. "Feels like a church," Tyler said. "What does this place?" Ruth looked up at the sign again. "Ruth's Truths." She chuckled. That was never supposed to be a sermon. Maybe not, but it turned into one hell of a gospel. She nudged him playfully. "You're getting sentimental." He smiled. "Maybe. Or maybe I'm just grateful I got to be part of something that didn't just fix the world, it reminded it to care." Ruth didn't answer. She just stood quietly, breathing in the dusk. A gust of wind caught the edge of the chalkboard out front. Ruth walked over, picked up the chalk, and added one more line beneath the day's menu. Then she stepped back and read it aloud. "Today you're fed, tomorrow you rise." The letter took Ruth 3 mornings to finish, not because she didn't know what to say. She'd been writing it in her head for weeks. But because every time she sat at the counter, pen in hand, someone would walk through the door needing something. A meal, a moment, a hug. And Ruth had learned real healing doesn't rush. She used a thick piece of parchment she found in the back office drawer, the kind that still smelled faintly like old books. Her handwriting was slow, but elegant loops and curves formed with deliberate care. When she finished, she pinned it to the wall beside the chalkboard menu. Not hidden, not spotlighted, just present. By the end of the week, every regular had read it. Some took pictures. One woman copied it down in a small journal with shaking hands. The letter read, "To anyone who has been broken and blamed for it. To those told their worth was measured in dollars, deeds, or obedience to the ones left behind by their own. Let this place be proof that survival is not the same as silence. Let it be a reminder that kindness, even after betrayal, is a weapon no thief can wield. And if you must choose between vengeance and dignity, choose dignity every time. Let good be louder than what tried to break you." Ruth. The letter didn't make headlines, but it made its way into hearts. People came just to stand in front of it. Some cried, some nodded. Some added sticky notes below it with their own one-line truths. My mom finally apologized. "I left last night. I'm safe. I'm 32 and this was my first real breakfast." It wasn't a wall of grief. It was a wall of arrival. One evening after the lunch rush had faded and the kitchen had been scrubbed clean, Ruth and Tyler sat across from each other at the small table near the front window. The sunlight slanted in golden rays across their faces. There was no need to talk, but Tyler looked like he was holding something inside that wouldn't stay quiet for long. Finally, he set down his tea and cleared his throat. "I did something." Ruth raised a brow. "If it's illegal, lie better." He chuckled. "No, it's actually the opposite." He reached into his backpack and pulled out a single envelope. Inside was a printed document, the edges bent like it had been handled more than once. She read the first line aloud. "University of Texas, School of Law. Admissions confirmation." Her eyes widened. Her fingers froze on the paper. "You're going back," she said. He nodded, a little shy now. "It took me a while. I had to pull some strings, write an appeal. But yeah, I'm doing it. Night classes mostly. Still working mornings here if you'll have me." Ruth stared at him, pride blooming so fiercely in her chest it made her breath catch. She stood, walked slowly to the teapot, and poured him a fresh cup. Then she slid it toward him, her voice soft. "Then I guess I better start teaching you how to argue properly. You're still too polite." He laughed, shaking his head. "I've learned from the best." They clinked mugs like old friends, which by now they were. The next morning was nothing special, and maybe that was the magic of it. The sun rose early, casting long, buttery shadows through the diner windows. Ruth arrived before Tyler as usual. She prepped quietly, turned on the griddle, checked the chalkboard, folded napkins. She placed a fresh flower in the mason jar by the window, a white carnation. The door opened at 7:01 a.m. A man came in holding a newborn, wrapped in a faded quilt. He didn't speak, just pointed at the baby, then at his own stomach, embarrassed. Ruth smiled and handed him oatmeal with a note tucked under the spoon. "You're doing better than you think." By 7:20, the tables were full. A group of high schoolers split a plate of toast and compared homework. A woman in a nurse uniform left a 20 on the counter and took only tea. Two brothers argued over whether Ruth's pancakes were better than their mother's. Ruth moved through the room like a lighthouse. Her steps were steady, her words simple. "Good morning. Try the jam. You okay today?" She didn't fix anyone. She just saw them. And somehow that was more than enough. Outside across the street, the camera began to pull back. It was quiet at first, just a steady drift, like the air itself wanted to give space. The sound of children laughing from the park nearby bled into the background. The sizzle of oil on the griddle cut through faintly. Inside the diner, the window framed a dozen tiny stories, spoons stirring eyes, meeting lives softening. The camera floated higher. You could see the entire block now. The diner like a heartbeat in the middle of an old, tired neighborhood finding its rhythm again. Higher still. Now just the shape of the roof, the sidewalk, the chalkboard sign, a small crowd gathering, a city not saved but trying. Then, fade to black, a beat of silence. Then, based on events that could happen in any family,